to share with you two pieces of scripture, quite playfully, if you will. The first is from Psalm 104. Yonder is the sea, great and wide. Creeping things innumerable are there, living things both small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan that you formed to sport in it. These all look to you to give them their food in due season. And when you give to them, they gather it up, and when you open your hand, they are filled with good things. And I partly mention that because, or mostly because, a friend of mine gave a quite a whimsical reflection on Leviathan and this giant sea monster playing in the water, and God just created that to play in the water and to capture a little bit of God's diversity of creation and playfulness. Not that the Leviathan was there to smash your boat down, which is one kind of feeling you can get, but actually that God was just doing that, and it wasn't really about you. It was about playfulness. The other text comes from the Palm Sunday story, and just to read a really brief quote. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." And Jesus answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." And I have another number of little texts that I like about that, where nature things do things that we don't expect. They're very much immersed in the poetry, and I'm quite aware of that, but I kind of love the poetry and the challenge of it, that the stones talk. There's one that the trees of the field clap their hands, which always seems to me kind of absurd, yet somehow delightful. So very quickly, images. As a little child, where I grew up in the suburbs, is that there was a TV ad that had an indigenous person from the United States dressed in a grand headdress, and somebody drove by in their car and littered, and a little tear rolled down his eye. That, like, as an image, that along with my family ordering me a magazine called Ranger Rick, which was a raccoon who wore a ranger hat and taught us about nature. I don't know if this is really a theology, but it's two very deep feelings from an early childhood experience, that there's something good about the environment. There's something good about nature. And there's something dangerous about how human beings treat it. And so, as I say, that's just a kind of little feeling I have when I think about this as a little child, of that's just a feeling that was emerging. Secondly, I just go around trying to be blunt because there's a lot of chatter about this. Climate change is real. We're in profound denial. We're being called to make a lot of little changes, and we're being called to make some profound changes. And it's very challenging because there's a lot in it. There's a lot that's kind of pleasant and uplifting and luxurious about not changing. And there are powerful forces that don't want to change, and things that reinforce not only are powerful in what they want to do, but our own selves in what we get out of it and reinforce our denial. We're dealing with this a big crisis. And one of the challenges of the crisis is that there's a lot of little things that contribute to the crisis. So, for example, if I decide to drive my grandmother to go out for a drive, to enhance her life, to take her shopping, and my car is pouring carbon dioxide into the environment, it's a little thing on the effect of the environment when you add up the total. It's a profoundly meaningful thing in that relationship, but it is part of the challenge. And equally, when I go out by myself, and I could ride my bike, but it's a little bit longer that way, so I take the car because it's a little bit easier. We have these huge choices. But the effects are huge and grand, all collectively together. So it's very different than when the stove is hot and you say, don't touch the stove, you'll burn your hand. Because I'll do the thing that causes the damage, but I won't feel it until a long time from now, and some others might feel it more. So this part of what makes it a faith issue and a spiritual issue is the difficulty of connecting an action to the result and staying disciplined and focused and appropriate in that to help make the world a better place. I owe this image to Diane Jacobson, who's a professor in the United States, a Lutheran professor, and she talked this about Job, but there's something wild about creation. Again, back to Leviathan, that we don't control everything, and we tend to only be aware of that, or one way we get into that is there's these grand things happen and they're larger than we can imagine. But nature is inherently like that, and there's something wild about it. And in 5 minutes, I can't tell you anything much more, but I think that that's very important. There is something wild about it. And then creation. Creation speaks, proclaims, and inspires. God speaks through creation, if you will. And that's rooted in our relationship with God. A phrase I've learned from contact with Indigenous elders is all my relations. I think that's a beautiful image, and I don't know the half of it. I don't mean to steal it. I just mean to say it's drawing me into something, that we're in relationship with all our neighbors and with all of creation. That you heard in the Psalm text, there's a huge amount of diversity, and we're being challenged to go, the world's not just about me and people like me, but it's about diversity, and creation speaks to us through that. And I already mentioned about creation's calling us to choose a common good and the challenges of that. The power of that for me, I recognize in two quick images. One is the youth group I used to work with, and they would tell me, I feel close to God at camp. That was partly a community experience, but it was partly a nature experience. The other is from my own son and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when we went to the opening ceremonies very early in the morning, unusually early for us. Dawn, that was an important part of it. Dawn, the land forms us in dawn. But him, for whatever reason, wiggling his way up very close, without being inappropriate, found a little spot in the circle, and standing at a profound sense of attention. Actually, Shaun, you kind of said it. The fire was drawn to him, but drawn to him from a core level. Creation speaks to us, and that this is a part of our theology. Lutherans, we talk about, what the preacher does and what the word does and what the people do and blah, 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 and that's important, but recognizing that creation speaks to us and inspires us as well. And just finally, just to prove I do have some heritage sense, is that in baptism, we speak about 4 great stories in baptism, all of which are about water. The creation story itself, and water gives life and sustains life. The Noah story, in which God says the whole ecosystem goes on the ark, so the whole ecosystem is preserved. The Exodus story, which is about the crossing of the water, profoundly, how did they get from here to there, and what does it mean to cross a boundary? But they go from a city to a wilderness to a promised land, back to a wilderness, and they're in the land all the time, trying hearing what it speaks, proclaims, and inspires. And finally, Jesus himself is baptized. The Spirit descends like a dove. He's at the edge of the wilderness. Again, in all of these things, the land and the creation are inviting us to pay attention to the realities of the challenges we face, and to the reality of encountering a God who loves us profoundly and asks us to act with profound responsibility. Thank you.